Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Blais, the Executive Director of the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for being here today. Congressman McGovern was elected to the House of Representatives in 1996. In 2001, he was appointed to a seat on the House Rules Committee, which sets the terms for debate on most legislation. Congressman McGovern represents the 2nd Congressional District, which includes 14 towns in Franklin County. He is a fierce human rights advocate with a focus on ending hunger at home and abroad. And he will walk the walk and talk the talk, as we've seen in Monty's March. I had the pleasure of working for Jim. You will not find a more compassionate or convicted leader, and we're thrilled to have him here today.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and I want to thank her for her leadership of the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce, but also for her friendship over the years. As she mentioned, she worked for me for many years. She worked for John Oliver. She worked for University of Massachusetts, and she's a dear friend. She's the mother of Shane, and she's a dear friend, and because there's not too many people I get up this early in the morning for. And she mentioned walking in Monty's March. She's walked alongside of me during many of those occasions. I think because she thought I would collapse and somebody needed to drag me up the street. So, but I appreciate it very much. I'm also grateful to Linda and the board for the invitation to speak here today. I want to thank GCC for hosting this, and Geraldine and her crew for the delicious breakfast, and Bob Pura, who's my dear friend, who I admire so much, who has done so much for this community, and we appreciate your leadership, and so thank you for all that you do. I want to thank the sponsors of today's breakfast, the Center for Human Development, Shannon, thank you, and LifePath, Roseanne, thank you, and Alan, thank you for your presentation. I've been on Meals on Wheels deliveries, and it's an amazing program, and it's not just about getting people nutritious meals, it is about basically ensuring the health and well-being of our senior population, and it's frustrating to me that we deal with budgets that threaten to cut Meals on Wheels when we ought to be talking about expanding it. So thank you, and Roseanne and LifePath, thank you for all the wonderful work that you do. I too want to begin by remembering our friend Peter Kokot, who is a big man with an even bigger heart, who was a great teacher to me, who did so much for this community, and it's just hard to believe someone so young. But our thoughts and our prayers are with his family. People have been coming up to me, I think out of concern, saying, "How you doing? How's Washington? Is everything okay in Washington?" And I just tell them I'm living the dream, and nightmares are dreams too. It's tough. I mean, last night I was at an event with Roseanne, and Andrea Leibson is here. We were at the Shea Theater in Turners Falls, which is this incredible treasure. It's a wonderful venue, doing a forum on hunger. And, before the event, there was this kind of, you meet and mingle with some of the people that are there. And there was a woman behind the concession stand and asked me, "Would you like a glass of wine?" And I couldn't answer, and she said, "Can I get you a glass of wine?" And I finally said yes, but what I wanted to say is I'd like the bottle. I had just come back from Washington, and so but look, it is exhausting to watch what's unfolding in our nation's capital. I was on an airplane a few weeks ago with this woman who said to me, "I have to tell you, I feel like I need to pull the shade." She says, my routine used to be, I get up in the morning, I make myself coffee, I'd read the newspaper, watch the news, get my kids off to school, and go to work. She says, "I'm finding now that my routine is I get up in the morning, I make myself coffee, I get my kids to school, and I go to work. I skip the whole news part of it." She says, "Because it makes me cranky, it makes me nervous, and I feel that I'm better by avoiding following what's in the news." And I kind of responded to her. I said, you need to stay involved. You need to pay attention, because this is when it matters the most. And I know it is tough, I know it is exhausting, where there are 19 major stories a day, where everything seems like it's, a crisis. But we need good, thoughtful people to help demand that our leaders at the local, state, and federal level, do what's in the best interest of this country. I said, maybe you ought to begin your morning with an Irish coffee, and then the rest of the day will go a little bit easier. But this is a time for us to be vigilant. This is a time for a renewed activism. I mean, where if you care about something, you have to speak up and defend it. If you like the direction we're moving in, you have to say it. If you don't, you have to say that as well. Because so much is at stake. We see budgets that decimate programs and initiatives that people in this area rely on. It's not just programs for the most vulnerable, like the programs we talked about at the Shea Theater last night that, by the way, the Franklin County United Way and Young Professionals sponsored that event last night, and they deserve a lot of credit. But it's not just those programs. It's programs that fund our transportation systems, that provide help for our small businesses, that provide seed money for our communities to do planning and to try to attract more business to our area. All those things are at stake because there are some people who believe that the government has no role in anything, that the less government, the better. Well, I understand that people don't want to pay taxes, but the bottom line is sometimes people don't appreciate what government is. I remember during the debate on the Affordable Care Act, I walked into a Dunkin' Donuts one morning, and if you ever want to kind of get a sense of where people are thinking, go to a Dunkin' Donuts like at 7:30 in the morning. There's usually about 15 old guys sitting in the back, and they're solving the world's problems. And a guy said to me, "Hey, McGovern, we don't want government involved in our health care." And I said, "How old are you?" He says, 82. I says, "Are you on Medicare?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "What the hell do you think Medicare is? That's government." He said, "Well, it's not that. It's everything else." I said, "Well, let's go through this." I says, "The Affordable Care Act, eliminates copays for preventative care for people your age. Do you want to pay copays?" No. It's not that. It's everything else." I said, "Well, it's closing the donut hole in the prescription drug part of Medicare, which will mean that you'll pay less in prescription drug costs. Do you not like that?" He said, "No, it's everything else." I said, "Well, that's it for you. What are you talking about?" I said, "My prescription for you is take 2 Advil and stop watching Fox News." But there are things that we need to pay attention to that are very relevant to what we all deal with here every day. One of the things I want to work with members of this community on in the coming months is, how we promote tourism in this area more effectively. This is a relatively new part of my district. I grew up in Worcester. Growing up in Worcester, we never came out west. I don't know why, but we just didn't. But some of the most beautiful parts of the Commonwealth and some of the most beautiful parts of the country are here. Driving in here this morning was breathtakingly beautiful. We have people who, we did a brewery tour. I'm talking a little bit too much about alcohol here today, I think. But we did a brewery tour highlighting, this new kind of growing industry out here. There's a tourism aspect to that. We have incredible farms. People want to do agri-tours. We need to help connect the dots, and we're going to be working with you to try to do that better. I was just having a conversation with Oreste Varela of the SBA, who's here. We're talking back there. We're talking about bringing our regional administrator out here and doing a forum for all of our small businesses out here to figure out ways to make sure that we're better connecting with SBA, to make sure that whatever federal money there is, that you're getting it. I recently did a tour with the Economic Development Administration through some of my district. We're going to take them through the rest of the district later on, but talking about the federal monies that are available for local communities for economic development planning and how we need to be more aggressive in trying to get those funds to come to this area. And so we're going to be working on those things as well as on other issues like Natalie mentioned Monty's March. You know, we need to come together as a community, especially now when the federal government is falling short in terms of providing the assistance we need to make sure that our most vulnerable have enough to eat. I don't know why it's a radical idea to believe that food ought to be a right for everybody, but in Washington it is. And I've seen too many hungry people in my congressional district in this country. There's not a single city or town in America that is hunger-free. And if you've ever seen a child who is hungry, it breaks your heart. It shouldn't be in this country. And so while we push our state and federal legislators to do more, we locally need to stand up, and we need to do more, and we will. Let me just say a few words, and then we'll open this up to questions, because I think that's more interesting than listening to me ramble on. But you know, Washington has become a place that is incredibly polarized, to the point where not a lot is getting done. And there are things that need to get done. Like, we need to have a budget to keep the government running for a year, right? That shouldn't be too heavy of a lift, but yet it has become a heavy lift, where we're funding government a few weeks at a time. That is crazy, and it is bad for our economy. You know, and it's bad for economic development. If Massachusetts doesn't know how much it's going to get in terms of transportation dollars for the year, it can't work with you, you know, on projects that may require funding that requires a year. And it's on every single agency. The uncertainty is hurting our economy. And so we need to get together, and we need to do things like pass a budget, fund the government for a year. We may not all agree on the priorities, but we ought to keep the government running. It ought to be running for a year. We need to do something about gun violence. I got to tell you, I mean, I am heartsick over what's happening in this country. I mean, the latest tragedy in Parkland, Florida, I mean, you just want to scream, because this is not the first time. I mean, it seems every other week there's a shooting in this country, but not just a shooting, massacres in this country. I don't think it's too much to ask that we create a climate in this country where parents don't have to worry about the safety of their kids when they go to school. Or you have to worry about your safety if you go to a movie theater, or a nightclub, or a concert, or if you go to church. And yes, there's a mental health component to this that we need to take very seriously, and we need to make sure the funds are there. Yes, there's a law enforcement aspect to this, so we need to make sure that our law enforcement have the training and have the ability to be able to do what they need to do. But I got to tell you, the other part of this is there are too many guns on the street. And there's just something wrong when a young kid could walk into a gun store and buy an AR-15 with no waiting period, and it wasn't a big deal. You know, we ought to be passing sensible gun safety legislation. It ought not to be a partisan issue. I mean, we ought to believe that we ought to not only strengthen our background checks, we ought to expand our background checks. Background checks don't do any good if there are 100 loopholes where you can buy guns without going through a background check. We need to do that right. We need to ban bump stocks, which can turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons like machine guns. That's what happened in Las Vegas. You know, we ought to be talking about, you know, passing a law that says that if you're on an FBI terrorist watch list and therefore you cannot ride on an airplane in this country, then you ought not to be able to go and buy a gun in this country. And finally, I believe we ought to ban assault weapons. I mean, look, I've got my two brother-in-laws are hunters. They are responsible gun owners, but they don't understand why there are people in this country that insist that weapons of war ought to be available for purchase, and then anybody who wants them ought to be able to get it. I mean, we need some common sense on this. And one of the frustrations that I have had is that we can't even get these ideas brought to the House or Senate floor for debate. Now, if people disagree with me, fine, then you can vote differently. But I think this is a serious enough issue where there ought to be a debate, where there ought to be a vote. And I get it, the NRA is a very powerful lobby that spends countless millions of dollars in political campaigns. And they have a very intensified lobbying effort. But you know, I'd much rather lose an election than lose a child. And I have to tell you, we're at this point now where we're going to have to make some serious decisions. So I would say this, and I'll end with this, and we'll open up to questions. What gives me great hope are these young people, these teenagers that are coming forward. And I was watching the CNN town hall the other night and watching them being interviewed on the news, and these young men and women are so passionate and so eloquent and so knowledgeable and so committed to creating a future for themselves and their families where they don't have to worry about school shootings and massacres. And I'll tell you, I know they're coming to Capitol Hill, and I will find it hard to believe that any member of Congress can ignore their pleas. I mean, they are extraordinary, and so as long as they keep their voices up, you know, I'm hopeful that we will actually make progress on this issue. So let me end here, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Do I pick? Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Congressman, for coming out and speaking with us this morning. My name is Cheryl Dukes. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the College of Nursing at UMass Amherst, and actually when you were first part of our district, I helped arrange a tour for you to come see many different things on campus, so it's good to see you here.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
So I would like to actually respond to your last statement, and I would like to ask all of us to actually change the conversation around school massacres and to deepen the conversation to link it to gun violence for everybody. The fact that our young white men are killing mostly women and children in schools, but the connection isn't being made to our law enforcement that are also involved with killing unarmed black people. The fact that people in communities of color, LGBT communities, all of our communities that are other and different, somehow our issues are not the same as issues connected to young white men going out and having Las Vegas massacres, or young white men going into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and assassinating 9 people who were prominent members of their community doing very good things in their community. So as we talk about gun violence in this country, it would be nice if it was connected to gun violence affecting all of our communities, not just some of them. So if we could have that conversation, I think that that would change how we talk about what our response is, because we have more than enough gun laws. Policies don't actually make a difference if they're not enforced.
Yeah.
And who are the people who are doing the enforcement, and who are the people who are benefiting by what's happening? So I would just like to have a different kind of conversation that's connected to all people.
Well, I agree with you. I think it's a very good point. And I mean, gun violence, unfortunately, is nothing new in this country, and it is sad that, you know, each day individuals are being killed. Many are targeted. Members of the African American community, members of the LGBTQ community, and they don't receive the attention that massacres do. I'll only disagree with you on one thing. When you said we have enough gun laws, I don't believe we do. I don't believe that people should be able to go into a store and buy a weapon of war. I'm just at this point now where I just do not believe that that is enough. And I do not believe our background check laws are sufficient. And we have gun laws in Massachusetts that are pretty good, and we have some of the lowest rates of gun violence anywhere in the country. But if the laws are good in Massachusetts, but they're not good in Georgia, or they're not good in Vermont, or they're not good in Missouri, I mean, we're one country. You can easily drive back and forth and get whatever you want. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this conversation needs to be widened. But I think part of the response has to be we need to strengthen these laws. And I think that the time has long passed since we should take action. But at a minimum, we ought to be having a debate. And there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong, in the United States Congress when issues like this, where people of all ages and all backgrounds are losing their lives, and we can't even get a debate. We tried a few months ago, we had a protest led by John Lewis, the great civil rights leader and member of Congress from Georgia. We did a sit-in, and the response by the Speaker of the House was to shut the House down, shut the cameras off, and so nobody would see us. He didn't know that these little, that you could actually film with these, right? And live stream them, and so we were able to get our message out. But I think I agree with the point you raised.
Hi, Congressman McGovern. I'm Phil Corman from CISA, Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture. Nice to see you off of Monty's March.
Yeah, I'm walking too. Yeah.
Give it 6 months, it's amazing. So I just wanted to raise the point that it's pretty painful for me to always watch that we have hunger in our communities and we have farmers who are growing food in our communities, all in the same, and yet it's always been a challenge for our farmers to sell to all members of the community and for all members of the community to have access to local food. We've been lucky in Massachusetts, or skilled, because this past year we've had a program that's helped families on SNAP to get an instant rebate when they buy directly local produce from our farmers. In fact, so successful, over 65,000 households, 35,000 households in Massachusetts participated, and 200 farmers, and lo and behold, the USDA grant money ran out. So I'm wondering what your forecast is for the Farm Bill, and whether you think there might be resources for programs like this to renew its funding in Massachusetts and nationwide.
I'm not sure about the fate of the Farm Bill. I'm on the Agriculture Committee as well. I'm the ranking member in the Nutrition Subcommittee. We're told that there is a Farm Bill that has been drafted that is being scored by the Congressional Budget Office, but I haven't seen one sentence in the nutrition title. I haven't seen one sentence in any title of the Farm Bill. And when bills are being written in secret, that's usually not a good sign. It means that they're going to drop it on you, and there's going to be stuff in there that you're not going to like. So we're trying to push for a more open and transparent process. We have a little coming attraction of what we might expect in the President's budget, where he calls for cutting SNAP by $260 billion. He's using SNAP as basically an ATM machine to fund the tax cuts. I think that's unconscionable. But that we may see something like that in the Farm Bill. He's talked about basically limiting what people who are on SNAP can get with their SNAP dollars. And he's not talking about fresh fruits and vegetables. In fact, the opposite. He's talking about requiring people to get what he calls a harvest box of pre-selected items like peanut butter and canned foods, no fresh vegetables, no fresh fruits, and people would get them instead of being able to go to a store and buy what they want. Now, logistically, how they would do that, I have no idea. But nonetheless, what is troubling to me about that is it's yet another attack on poor people. And I'm tired of this constant attack on people who are vulnerable, belittling their struggle, treating them like second-class citizens or people that can't be responsible. I think they do this deliberately because then it's easier to try to get people to vote for cuts in some of these programs. The bottom line is when it comes to SNAP, the average benefit is about $1.37 per person per meal. I mean, try to buy a cup of coffee for that. That's why our food banks are at capacity. The majority of people on the program are not expected to work. They're kids. They're senior citizens. Now, I guess you could repeal the child labor laws and send grandma back to the factory, but and then the other group that is not expected to work are people with severe disabilities. Of those who can work, the majority work. Well, that's just a fact. But they earn so little that they still qualify for the benefit. So maybe we ought to be talking about how we bump up wages so that when you work, you get paid a livable wage. They're talking about targeting a group of people called able-bodied adults without dependents and saying that they should be entitled to no food benefits if they're not working or in a job training program. Now, that's a nice soundbite, but what happens if you live in a community that's in a rural area where you don't have transportation and there's no job training programs and there are no jobs? What happens if you're, like we're finding this out, a lot of returning veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan struggling to get back into the community, and you're not in a job training program, you don't have a job. You lose your food benefit? I mean, this is cruel. It is cruel. And I just, I tell people all the time that the most effective way to fight back is that people need to tell stories. Because when I tell people that there are 42 million Americans who are food insecure or hungry, nobody really quite knows what that means. I mean, what does 42 million look like, right? It's a big number. We all go, oh, it's awful, right? But you don't, I think we're so inundated with statistics, we've lost our human ability to feel them. But, you bring families in to meet with their elected officials and let them tell their stories, it's hard to ignore that reality. And so I don't know, I'm nervous about the Farm Bill, and my line is this: if this Farm Bill increases hunger in this country, then it's a bad Farm Bill. And I'd rather have no Farm Bill than a lousy Farm Bill. And we'll just have to wait and see. We were told in October it was coming up, we were told in December it was coming up, so now we're told it's going to be up in March, we'll see. But I'm nervous about what might be in it because we're not being shown anything. Yeah. Oh.
Hi. Will you repeat my question?
I'm going to repeat Linda's question.
The court ruling, I think it was in Pennsylvania, that requires redistricting, less gerrymandering. Do you think that will have a national impact in creating districts that are less partisan?
Yeah, so the question is, the court case in Pennsylvania, which basically said that the redistricting in Pennsylvania represented kind of extreme partisanship gerrymandering, and so that they had to redraw the map. And the Supreme Court actually upheld what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did. Will that have an impact on gerrymandering and redistricting in the future? I hope so. Because I think there are two ways to kind of clean up our system. One is to deal with the issue of partisan gerrymandering. We have a state legislature in Massachusetts that actually came up with a redistricting map that gets supported by Democrats and Republicans. That's unusual. But I'm on a bill that says we should take redistricting out of the hands of state legislatures and put them in the hands of independent commissions so that they draw districts that are not examples of partisan gerrymandering. I mean, we have districts that are drawn so meticulously that only a certain type of person can get elected. I mean, there's no diversity at all in that district in terms of political thought. So we need to get redistricting right so it actually represents what this country actually believes. The second thing we need to do is deal with the issue of money. I mean, we talked about guns earlier. I mean, I don't think this would be as polarized of an issue if it weren't for all the money that the NRA could dump into political campaigns. Our founding fathers, I can't imagine, ever thought we would have a system where it would cost you millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to run for a seat in the United States House of Representatives. We have seats that people are raising $20, $30 million for a 2-year service in the United States House of Representatives. That is obscene. Now, the problem is the Supreme Court has made a number of decisions that basically, even if you had a Congress that wanted to limit political spending, has made it virtually impossible to do that. They'd say it was unconstitutional. So there are two ways that we can change this. One is get a better Supreme Court, which I hope happens at some point. And two, the other way is to amend the Constitution and to give our legislatures the authority to limit how much can be spent in campaigns. I have a constitutional amendment that would do that. I have another constitutional amendment that says that corporations aren't people, because I don't think that, because people are people. Corporations don't have kids, people do. They don't fight in wars, people do. But it's the combination, to me, of partisan gerrymandering and this obscene amount of money that has polluted our system. And it has basically, he trampled on the voices of ordinary people. I mean, we just had a tax bill passed where 84% of the benefits go to the top 1% income earners in this country. I think if things were a little bit different, maybe you'd have a tax bill that actually where it was the reverse, where more of the benefits went to working people or people struggling to get into the middle class. We're undoing every single environmental protection regulation that is possible to undo. We're actually going back, we actually are promoting coal again in the United States. Nobody wants it, but we're promoting it anyway. It's crazy. That's not a reflection of where people are. That's a reflection of corporate special interests. And so you got to deal with the issue of redistricting. We need to have more nonpartisan redistricting strategies, and we need to get this money out of the system, because good people are not going to want to run, and you're going to have pretty soon you get to the point where the only people who are going to run are people who are multimillionaires or billionaires, and I don't think that's good for the country. So anyway, on that happy note,
I think we have time for one last quick question, if anybody has a quick one. Ann Hamilton.
Ann Hamilton, yeah. The last time I spoke before this group, Ann Hamilton was the executive director. Yeah.
So I wondered if you see anyone emerging as a political candidate to oppose President Trump.
Yeah, I think there'll be lots of people that will come forward, and there'll be some Republicans that come forward, but I think I think we all ought to keep our powder dry on that for a while, and because there may be somebody that we don't even know of yet, and it doesn't have to be a politician. It could be somebody in the business community. It could be somebody from the academic community. It could be someone from the nonprofit community. And we ought to be open-minded. But here's the deal. Whoever it is, whether on the Democratic side or on the Republican side, we have to get back to demanding that politics be decent. And this is one of my biggest problems with the current administration. It's not just that I disagree with the policies. We all can agree or disagree with policies. It's that I find so much of what comes out of the White House to be offensive. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. I'm trying to explain to her how somebody who behaves this way could be in the White House. It's just hard for her to understand. She gets it. She doesn't understand why everybody else in the country doesn't get it. I raised my kids to believe that no one was a loser. Everybody ought to be treated with respect. Everybody, ought to be treated with dignity. To have a president that tweets out insulting nicknames, threatens to jail his opponents, tries to divide this country along racial lines, ethnic lines, religious lines, talking about immigrants as if, they're all criminals. It's offensive. And, I tell people I didn't agree with George W. Bush on very much. But I never questioned the fact that he was a decent man. I do with this guy. And, and I don't want this to be the new normal, because if this is, then you're going to have people running for office, not just for president or Congress, but people running for city council who are going to adapt these tactics. We want good people to get involved in politics. We want people who are decent, who are honorable, who want to help their communities get involved in politics. And we don't want more of this. I don't care what your political affiliation is. This cannot be what the presidency is about or what our government is about. So there'll be a lot of people running, and we'll see what happens. But I'm focused now on the midterm elections, because I'm counting on that to save the. I'm hoping the results will be such that we'll save the world. So anyway, but thank you all for having me here.